What is it? Uh-huh. No? Okay. Hello and welcome back. It is Monday. I am Mr. Sisotris, and this week I wanted to talk about nonfiction books. Now, I don't read a ton of nonfiction, but I do love nonfiction every now and then, especially in audiobook form. And so this is going to be 10 nonfiction books that really stuck with me. Let's get into it. First off on the list is The Family Romanov by Candace Fleming. Now, this is actually a YA history. There are much more in-depth more complex histories of the family Romanov that are out there that are really good. There's like a multi-volume set that goes from like Peter the Great up until the 1917 revolution. But this one is just so well constructed. It's informative. It gives you all the kind of main information, and it really focuses on sort of them as people, not as sort of hinge points in the grand scheme of history. It really gets kind of into sort of who they were as a family and the disconnect between sort of the family life that they had and then sort of the political danger that they represented to kind of the common people. But I really, really love this one. It's really well done. It's got tons of little side things and information, pictures, all that kind of stuff. And it really just, I mean, it's not that long. So if you're looking for sort of a brief overview of kind of everything, I really, really, really appreciated this. It really grabbed me and I loved the writing style. So definitely would suggest this one. Next up on the list is probably one that you've read in school, and that is A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. This one is sort of a meditation on women in academia and women in writer spaces and the sort of disconnect that there is between how men are treated in academic spaces and how women are treated. Now, this was written in like 1920s-ish, and so a lot of the stuff has changed since then, but the sort of general attitude of sort of how women are treated and the, you know, feeling like they always have to be performing labor for other people, and the concept of them just kind of as their own person with their own creative endeavors and their own kind of desire to do things just on their own is still very much important to kind of discuss. So I think this is why this is such an important book for people to keep reading. It's really, really short. You can get through it. This also contains the really famous kind of thought experiment of like, what if Shakespeare had a sister? And I know a ton of people have read that in school. That's kind of the part of this that we read. And then I've since read the whole thing. But it's insightful and it's got this kind of wit to it. It's really engaging. I really like Virginia Woolf's writing style, and her nonfiction is just as kind of fun and delightful as her fiction. So definitely would recommend this one. Next up is a read that I went through kind of recently. I read it in audio form and I loved it so much I went right out and got a paperback version of it so that I could like lend it out to family members, and that is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This is just, it's kind of an everything book. She is a biologist, and she sort of just looks at the way native ways of looking at the world offer up sort of answers to a lot of the strife that the world is facing right now. And it's all about sort of forging connections and community, and she talks about the way that sort of Indigenous Americans are treated. There are parts of it that are just cozy and wholesome and like a hug, and there's other parts that are just brutal and unflinching and really disturbing, but it works so well. She's got such a great narrative voice, and she talks about anecdotes from her own life. She talks about people she's interviewed. She talks about famous stories that have appeared in the news, and it just all kind of comes together in the spirit of sort of fostering connections between sort of Indigenous communities and sort of the majority communities that are sort of edging them out as a means of like speaking out against stereotypes and kind of setting the record straight. This book is really gorgeous. I loved it. It's so captivating. She always knows how to keep your attention. There's one section that she's just talking about like a pond and like the various things that live in a pond, and it's just completely captivating. This one's a little bit longer. The audiobook I would definitely recommend. I think she narrates her own audiobook. It's so good. It's kind of a basic answer because I feel like a lot of people were recommending this for a while, but this is beyond being just kind of a trendy book that everyone sort of liked. It has staying power, and it's definitely one that I would recommend that more people read. Next up is one that I kind of wish had become sort of outdated, but really never did. And that is The Demon Haunted World by Carl Sagan. This is one where he's talking about sort of logic versus sort of the mob mentality, conspiracy theories, misinformation, all that kind of stuff, and the kind of panic that you see kind of in the popular culture where people sort of lack critical reasoning skills, critical thinking, all that kind of stuff. There's one section in here where he talks about all the different logical fallacies and how they're used, which like everyone in every school should read forever. There's a section in here that is about the satanic panic, which when this was written was kind of going on, and so it gives you kind of an insight into sort of what that was and kind of how this hysteria arose in sort of the media that had like no basis in fact. This is a very comforting book, even though he's talking about all these horrifying, conspiracy theories and mass hysteria and all that kind of stuff. He kind of approaches it with a very logical, non-patronizing sort of approach, and I really, 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 really love this one and would definitely recommend it. Social media today has just made all of these problems sort of worse, and everyone just sort of flies to conclusions immediately, and so conspiracy theories that have no basis in reality take off and get to the point where people are like going no contact with family members because these conspiracy theories have such a hold on them. And so this is all about sort of just approaching all of this with logic and critical thinking skills and being reasonable, and I really love it. Carl Sagan was just a really important figure. He's someone who I just really, really adore. The other book that I considered putting on this list is the, not novelization because it's a nonfiction book, but the sort of companion book to his Cosmos series. And a lot of the science in that has kind of since been updated a little bit, but the way he writes is just wonderful. It's just inspiring, and he never talks down to his audience. He assumes that they're intelligent, reasonable people, and he just kind of lays out, this is the facts, this is how you approach a situation, this is how you vet sources, all that kind of stuff. And it's just wonderful. Next up on the list is Orientalism by Edward Said. This is sort of a very seminal text. I think a lot of people read it. It's a very important text in the field of post-colonial analysis of literature and texts and everything. This is very much looking at sort of the way that certain cultures are portrayed in the media as a means of kind of diminishing them. It's this sort of romanticizing of a culture and turning it into sort of a simplistic version of what it is. You see this a lot in movies in the 1950s and before, when they're set in like Asia or the Middle East, where you've got like the stereotypes and kind of Western conceptions of the music, and it's all sort of meant to sort of exoticize and be like, look how alien and strange and other these people are. They're so different from us in the West. He's talking about that phenomenon. And so this is just, it's really, 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 really good. He's a Palestinian author, and so just based on a lot of the way that the Palestinian people are being treated in the media right now, this is also very timely and something that I think people should read now. It was written in the 70s, but it's still very, very relevant. This is sort of one of those books that just sort of, it addresses something that we all are aware of to some extent, but maybe we don't have a word for it, or maybe we aren't talking about it enough. and it's engaging, and it's really, really interesting. I love this book. Next up on the list is A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. This is another kind of popular science book that has since, I think the science has been a little bit updated since it was written, but it doesn't really matter because the way that he writes about the subject is so enthusiastic, and just there's a warmth and a comfort in kind of the word. You can tell how much he really cared about sort of the field of astrophysics and everything that kind of goes into that and what we can learn from it. And it's almost a book of philosophy in a way. There is a lot of sort of complex science in here, but he explains it in a way that is really like you can understand it even if you're kind of a layman. And so I keep recommending this one. I really, really appreciated sort of the way that he's able to take big, huge cosmic concepts and make them relevant to sort of everyday people. He's very much kind of one of those who sort of got regular people interested in science rather than being afraid of it, because there is, and we're seeing this a lot now, is sort of this idea that like scientists are all out to get people and they're all plotting and scheming together and engaging in conspiracies and they're hiding the truth and all that stuff. And it's just, all that does is just foster paranoia and anger. And Stephen Hawking was one who was very much like, no, science is awesome. It is so cool. We need to get people excited about this. And so he took complex scientific concepts and made them engaging to sort of the everyday person. So definitely would recommend this one. Next is one that I just have in audio, and that is Erebus by Michael Palin. Yes, it is that Michael Palin of Monty Python fame. This book is wonderful. If you've, earlier, I think last year, I read the book The Terror, which is about the voyage of the ship, the Terror, that goes to the North Pole and gets lost, and there's monsters and stuff. Erebus is sort of the story of the real life voyage of those ships. There was two, Erebus and Terror. And it tells sort of two contrasting stories. The first is a journey to the South Pole, which is positive and fun and uplifting, and everything went well, and you get to hear about how excited everyone got about penguins, and it was great. And then it tells the second story of their voyage to the North Pole, which was bleak and terrifying and awful and really, really dark. And so the way he contrasts the two voyages is so good, but it's just the way it ends on a very dark, terrifying kind of note, but it begins so happy and positive. And so it's like you get the highest of the highs of triumph and exploration, and then you get the dark consequences of sort of digging too far in the pursuit of greed and everything. And it's so good. He narrates the audiobook himself, which is great because he's a terrific actor anyways. He's got a great voice, and I love the way that he tells that story. So would definitely recommend that one. It's a breezy read, but it's a lot of fun. Next up is a bigger one, and that one is The Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan. And this is sort of a history of the world, but it's focusing on Asia, basically, and the Middle East, and sort of that area of the world. Because a lot of the cultures and developments that are so important to the world today started there, and so much of the history is sort of centered on England, Germany, France, America, all that kind of stuff. It's sort of what they did and everything. And the history of the East isn't really explored as much. It's sort of either a footnote or it's sort of something in service of the story of the West. And it's so interesting to kind of see the rise and fall of the various cultures, the nations, the way things changed and evolved, the section talking about the city of Baghdad and how important it was. I really loved the section talking about the Opium Wars and just how dangerous and damaging that was to China especially. and it's just wonderful. It's sort of a sweeping history. It's a big, huge, thick, chunky book, but it never feels like a slog. It never feels like dry history. It's engaging, and it's so fascinating, and it's like we're seeing everything that we're used to from a different perspective, and it just highlights the accomplishments of so many of these cultures and nations that we don't really hear about a lot. So definitely would recommend this one. It's big, but it's worth it. It's really, really good. Next up is a shorter one, and this one is A History of the World in Six Glasses by Tom Standage. And this one is just so much fun. It's just the history, literally, of six beverages. You've got, let's see if I can remember them all. You've got coffee, tea, cola, wine, spirits, and beer. That's what it is. And it just tells the history of how these drinks were developed, how important they were, and all of the kind of big historical events that intersected with these, and kind of the trade in these goods and everything. And it sounds like it would be really dry and slow, but it's great. And I just had a great time. It was fun. It was really, really engaging, and it just pulls you right along. And it's just, there's all these little factoids that you are like, oh, I had no idea. I especially love the section on wine and its connection to sort of, ancient Greece and Rome and everything. It was just, I really, really, really enjoyed this book. It was a lot of fun, and it's not a huge commitment, so it's a quick read. You can get through it, and I don't know, it was just, I really enjoyed it. Last on the list is Hidden Figures by Margot Lee Shetterly, and this one is wonderful. Now, I will say, if you've seen the movie is very different. The movie sort of takes all these different stories. Oh yes, there's a cat. She's yelling at me. You're fine. If you've seen the movie takes these different stories of these women in sort of aerospace and their connection to the space race and the kind of aerospace field, and tells them kind of all together. The movie sort of blends them. In the book, they're sort of separate stories, and they're slightly different time periods. It's sort of giving a history of kind of the aerospace field and the space race from the point of view of sort of six important women who were sort of involved in it. And so the stories don't intersect the way they do in the movie. The movie is kind of a fictionalized look at these characters, but the book is just outstanding. It's really engaging, it's fun, and the different stories are just so exciting. Just seeing how kind of the aerospace field worked in the 50s and 60s, and how they were able to like put people on the moon using computers that were about as sophisticated as like modern day calculators. And that's just mind-boggling. So it's like the technology and the history is just so much fun. I love seeing how all these work, especially like the concept of computers. A computer was originally just a woman who was a math genius who was able to do all these calculations and would write these huge, thick texts of just specific calculations and everything and data, and then would give that to kind of the people in charge as they were building these things or plotting different things. And so it was just really engaging. I really loved it. I have this one in audio form also. Would definitely recommend it. It's a lot of fun. Now, there's a bunch of other books that are also on this list that I would want to talk about, but if I do that, I'll just be here all day. But there are some books that I do want to read that I haven't gotten to yet. 3 books that are on my list are The Will to Change by Bell Hooks. This is kind of looking at just masculinity and society and deconstructing toxic masculinity and all that kind of stuff. Bell Hooks is a legend. I read parts of her work in college, but it was always kind of simplified down to just being, oh, she's just a strong black woman, and isn't it inspiring that she was writing about feminism? It's like, okay, but this is one that I definitely want to read. It's not too long, but I can't wait to get to it, and I think I'm going to be reading this one next month. So the next one is called The Earth Transformed by Peter Frankopan. He's the one who wrote The Silk Roads. And this one is looking at sort of climate change and like weather and its connection to history, and it's another big, huge, massive tome. But I can't wait to get into this one and see kind of where he goes with it. But I'm really excited to read this one. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I saw it on the shelf and I was like, well, I loved his first book, so definitely want to read this one. Next up, this is kind of an odd one. I randomly picked this up off the shelf at a used bookstore, and it just sort of leapt out at me, and that is Madame Blavatsky by Gary Lockman. And this is a just biography. Madame Blavatsky was a very famous kind of spiritualist, medium, new agey person kind of in the turn of the century, the early 20th century. And she is sort of in part a inspiration for my username. So Madame Blavatsky was sort of a character that T.S. Eliot would have been aware of, the poet T.S. Eliot. And in the book, I think it's Brave New World, there's a character who's named Sesotris with an E, Sesotris. And she is sort of based off of this person, and she's kind of a spiritualist medium type. And when T.S. Eliot was writing The Wasteland, his character, Madame Sesotris, in the poem, was sort of he got the name from Brave New World, and he got kind of her vibe from Madame Blavatsky. She was sort of an inspiration for that sort of character. And so I saw this, and I was like, oh, it's Madame Blavatsky. I want to read about her, because I don't know a whole lot about her life, just sort of what has showed up in other kind of books. But this one looks really kind of interesting, because she's sort of this sort of pioneering, strange, mystic, clairvoyant type who was very famous and also notorious in Europe. And I don't know, she seems like someone that I want to read about, because she seems fun. So maybe this is one that I'll read once I finish my read through of Stephen Graham Jones's Indian Lake trilogy to kind of cap off spooky season. But with that said, that's all I have for you this week. I will see you next week. In the meantime, happy reading and enjoy the fall weather if you have it. If not, I hope you get fall weather soon. Bye-bye.